So our next reader up is Alexandra Teague, and she is the author of 2 books of poetry, The Wise and Foolish Builders, which is out from Percy in 2015. And it centers on the story of Sarah Winchester, the Victorian heiress to the rifle fortune, and the large, strange, supposedly haunted house she built in San Jose. And her other book is Mortal Geography, also from Percy in 2010. It was the winner of the much coveted Lexi Rudnitsky, I can't say your name, Rudnitsky Prize. It's no wonder I've never won it. And it's a wonderful prize for women poets. And I'm sorry, that book also won the 2010 California Book Award for Poetry. She's the recipient of a Stegner Fellowship, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and the 2014 Missouri Review Editor's Prize. She is assistant professor of poetry at the University of Idaho, and she's an editor for Broadsided Press. Please welcome Alexandra.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight, and I'm so thrilled to be back at Marin Poetry Center. I read here for my first book 5 years ago, and it was such a wonderful place to read. I am thrilled to be back. And Ellery, that was so beautiful. And Francesca, thank you again for all your coordinating with this. So I'll read mostly from my newer book, but I'll start with a few poems from Mortal Geography. And this first one came from a story that a colleague of mine at City College of San Francisco told me about one of her students. Adjectives of order. That summer, she had a student who was obsessed with the order of adjectives. A soldier in the South Vietnamese army, he had been taken prisoner when Saigon fell. He wanted to know why the order could not be altered. The sweltering city streets shook with rockets and helicopters, the city sweltering streets. On the dusty brown field of the chalkboard, she wrote, "The mother took warm homemade bread from the oven. City is essential to streets, as homemade is essential to bread." He copied this down, but he wanted to know if his brothers were lost before older, if he worked security at a 20-story modern downtown bank or downtown 20-story modern. When he first arrived, he did not know enough English to order a sandwich. He asked her to explain each part of lovely, big, rectangular, old red English Catholic leather Bible. Evaluation before size, age before color, nationality before religion, time before length. Adding and, one could determine if 2 adjectives were equal. After Saigon fell, he had survived 9 long years of torture. 9 and long. He knew no other way to say this. Since it is St. Patrick's Day, and I have Irish heritage on both sides of my family, I thought I should read a heritage poem. This does not overtly reference the Irishness, but you can imagine that's what I'm talking about. And this is called Nosebleeds. When I was the poor girl at the private school, I imagined the rich living at higher altitudes where the air was thinner. This explained why the girls with new penny loafers lay like swooning princesses in the nurse's office, their heads tilted back, nostrils trickling red threads of refinement. They would return to class collars stained, Russian royalty, like the hemophiliac Romanovs, of whom I was only a namesake, not an heir. At recess in winter, snow-white Kleenex drifting from pockets, white rabbit fur jackets. Years later, my classmate, daughter of Texas's largest fur fortune, stabbed her father to death for money and was sentenced for life. She'd played the mother in our 4th grade melodrama. As her daughter, the heroine, I could pretend to be frail. My nose never bled, no matter how I willed thick veins to weaken. I blamed my mother, granddaughter of a housekeeper. our ruddy bloodline that kept surviving. I'm sure I'm the only person in the world who ever wanted her nose to bleed. It's a true story. This is called Levels. We're looking for that sure thing, the glowing yellow of a carpenter's level with its bead of oil, or is it air that promises perfection? And we know tonight we'll never hold it steady, like the ladder in an old song I loved when I was far too young to understand. James, James, hold the ladder steady. And my mother had to explain eloping because I didn't yet know the edges of my life so well I'd want to climb outside it, hanging on only a promise. I still get lost on familiar blocks, the sun not gone but leaving, floating crookedly down between the buildings, or maybe we've built the ground slantingly from landfills, as all conversations tend to become lopsided, even the most romantic, or especially the most romantic. She was ready, which rhymed, of course, but I can't remember how it ended, if he really held her steady on the long climb to the bottom rung, and why she had to call his name twice as if he might not really be there. The ladder just sprouted like a tall tree against her window, and her stepping off backwards and singing into the rest of her life. So I'll stick with houses and family and in a different kind of vein by moving on to some poems from The Wise and Foolish Builders, my newer book. And this book began with my fascination with the story of Sarah Winchester, of the Winchester rifle fortune. How many of you know Sarah Winchester's story? Most of you. Okay, I'm speaking to a hometown crowd, basically. But if you're not familiar, I'll do the quick recap, which is Sarah Winchester was the wife of William Wirt Winchester, son of Oliver Winchester, founder of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. And their infant daughter had died, and then her husband, William, died of tuberculosis when she was in her early 40s, and so she was deeply grieving these two deaths. And the legend goes that she consulted a spiritualist medium in Boston who told her that the reason that her husband and daughter had died was that the ghosts of everyone killed with Winchester rifles were mad at the family and would kill her next. And the thing that's very strange about this is that she, again, married into this family and never had any active role in producing the guns. But she has been, in this legend, given the full collective responsibility for all the deaths of created by the gun called the gun that won the West. So according to the legend, the psychic said that in order to appease the ghost, she had to move west from Connecticut and endlessly construct a house to either house all the ghosts or to confuse the ghosts through the labyrinthine construction. And so the truth is she did move out west to San Jose, built a house that doesn't look quite this strange, but this is a collage using it. At the time she bought the house, it was 6 rooms, and by the time of her death, if you count vertical acreage and horizontal, it was 6 acres. So it's still a tourist attraction, the Winchester Mystery House. And there's a lot of other explanations for her fascination with building, and she didn't really construct continuously 24 hours a day, but that's how the legend goes. So as I started researching her, I thought I was going to write a few poems about her, and then I started getting into her story, which was so interesting, and also thinking about the house as a corollary for Manifest Destiny and this idea of building and building and building and what that has done to the country. So I ended up writing a whole book that sort of spins out from that history. And so I will begin with a poem that's called The House That Doesn't Grow. This is a modified villanelle, and it has an epigraph from Harry Houdini that says, Mrs. Winchester was told the reason a person dies is because that person does not continue to build additions to the house in which she lives. The spirit rots in the house that doesn't grow. The spirit rots in the house that doesn't grow. And so the builders build a hall of mirrors, dazzling as ice refracted back to snow, then wall it in. Reflections scare the ghosts. And start a staircase in the dining room below, each step an inch toward heaven, nothing more. That infinite ascent, measured and slow. The spirit rots in the house that doesn't grow. And so the roofers roof the chimney hole, then frame a ballroom with a stained glass door, imported on a ship to river boat, then brick it in. Blue light unnerves the ghosts. And hang 2 windows etched with Shakespeare quotes. These same thoughts people this little world, wide unclasp the table of their thoughts. The spirit rots in the house that doesn't grow, and so the workers work all night to close the 7th cupola before the coming storm, their wind chime hammers ringing in the cold. Then open it. The dark disturbs the ghosts. Then close it back, unnail the hallway cove. Then for the flowers watered through the floor, a long zinc trough to catch the overflow. The spirit rots in the house that doesn't grow, restless as a child whose crying wakes the ghosts. One of the reasons that Sarah Winchester's story was personally resonant for me was that my maternal grandfather was killed on an ammunition ship in World War II, and my grandmother and mother grieved for the rest of their lives that loss. And so I ended up writing some poems in which Sarah Winchester, after her death, speaks to various people anachronistically. And so this is called Ammunition, or Sarah Winchester, 23 Years Dead, and My Grandmother, Newly Widowed, Speak. And this intersperses my grandmother's story with some information about an explosion in an ammunitions factory during Sarah's life. The men were paid extra danger money. No metal buttons on their clothes, no cigarettes. In his letters from the South Pacific, he always called me honey, made me promise not to forget. No matches, no hairpins for the women. So many precautions, fire brigades waiting. To smile for him in the beveled mirror he'd bought that Christmas, home on leave. Deep wells until there were hydrants. Around the factories, even the horses wore bells everywhere, like the sound of ice cracking when he drove the lake. I'd hold my door open, brass instead of steel underfoot, less chance of sparks. The men worked overtime, frightened. The months he was gone were like that. The children in the back of the car, gearing up for each new war, or maybe war. Their shirts couldn't have pockets. Holding the shells he'd sent them, speckled around a tiny curve of breath, until the telegram, no stray bits of metal, and still each year explosions, fires spreading until I kept my promise, smiled as if he could see my reflection in the bevel of the South Pacific. They couldn't count the bodies. Before his ship was only splinters, smoke. As a child, I thought gun cotton sounded soft, like the cloth for a veil. I'll read another more personal poem that is called Reconstruction and intersperses the story of my family's home burning to the ground when I was 10, and some quotations from Nathaniel Hawthorne, who, like many people of his time period, claimed not to believe in spiritualism, which was very, very popular around the time of the Civil War for obvious reasons, the belief that people could communicate with the dead. So he claimed not to believe in it, and yet he would go to talks by spiritualists quite often. So, Reconstruction. After our house, its 13 rooms and 100 years burned to the ground, my mother said she'd known it would happen. Her premonitions leaned backwards, like shadows on the timothy grass. Like the chicken coop my parents tore down when I was young, the facts of wire and boards pried loose, as if the world were always a hammer's claw away from disassembly. I cannot consent, wrote Hawthorne, to have heaven and earth, this world and the next, beaten together like the white and yolk of an egg. Yet he listened often to talks of psychics, mesmerism, ghosts. The past and future spilling through the present's cracks, not flaring once, but smoldering inside my mother's mind. I could see it, but couldn't stop it, she said. I didn't want you to worry. Fearing suspicions of arson, she left our paintings to char, an exhibit of futility and fate, the blueprints for absence rolled and waiting as we drove away. I am unwilling that such a power should be exercised on you, of which we know neither origin nor consequence, he wrote his fiancée, cured of her headaches by magnetic powers. Enthusiasts who adopt such extravagant ideas appear to me to lack imagination. Impossible to know what my mother had known and what grief built. Sudden shell of a house she'd lived in 30 years. The stairs that led to a landing that led nowhere. A hanging ledge where in my one recurring dream I lived happily in the ruined air as if I always had. When I began this project, I knew nothing about guns. I was raised by pacifist vegetarians, so it's sort of an unlikely subject. And so I had to do a lot of research into Winchester rifles and their mechanics, and there's a number of poems that take on various parts of that history. And this poem is called Winchester 351 High Power Self-Loading Rifle. It's taken from an ad for that rifle and uses some quotations from the ad itself. And it has an epigraph from Italo Calvino, who has nothing to do with the ad, but did say this very interesting thing in The Baron in the Trees, which is, "It was the love which the hunter has for living things, and which he can only express by aiming his gun at them." Who doesn't dream of a heart with all sights attached, all moving parts enclosed? A love that can shoot through steel. See how the cougar eyes the bold word Winchester, its jagged rush, his body whisker close against the cliff, unflinching. Already he's prey, his muscled legs like roots too deep for springing, a pendulum stilling for the chime of fate. Who wouldn't lose this skin for an instant of lightning, one flash from the lightest, strongest, handsomest repeater ever made? Who hasn't gone to a ledge like this and waited, the scent on the wind that draws them, lover or devil, the heart reloading even as it recoils? So I'll read 2 more from this book and then a newer poem to finish. The move west did not happen just accidentally, of course. I mean, there was the draw of gold and land and other things, but there was also a lot of very active propaganda to get Easterners to move west into the wilds. And one of those pieces of propaganda was a painting that probably some of you have seen called American Progress by John Gast. It was painted in 1872, and it was reproduced on little, almost like trading cards, and a lot of people had them. And it showed this goddess or angel of progress, who's this very large figure floating across the plains, and then below her are these little tiny stagecoaches and horses and Indians and everybody else. So this a bit anachronistically imagines that painting. American Progress. She's billow and ravel, cumulus spume of angel dressed for seduction. Yes, you settler, follow. Bared legs eclipsing fields as she strides, glides snowblind white over dun plains. The stagecoach, oxen, smoke-streaked train all racing west off the canvas. She's bringing light, stringing the thin wire to bind you. Telegraph me, telephone me, call any time. The pine trees winnowing to poles beneath her, horses whinnying as pitch-faced shirtless chiefs look up and flee her. She'll show them brave. She'll show them brazen electric lights of Hollywood and Vine. The future's mine. She'll build you a railroad, collapse the continent to one gone point, Mississippi Pacific, teach your children words you've never heard. She'll feed you peaches swaddled in sweet syrup. Hurry, she's a floating castle, that old crushed dream of monarchy, with democratic thighs. She's buck and rail, pickaxe, wagon wheel, the star of empire burning at her brow. She'll show you how. She'll give you everything your rucksack mind desires. Sharps rifles, hills of bison, the past with its head stuck through a pillory of bones. She knows you'll let her lead you when she whispers, follow. You'll leave everything you know. You'll say you're home. I love that people are laughing. I love it when people aren't taking poetry too seriously. I often have these images in here that are meant to be humorous, and sometimes people sit there just being very deadpan. So thank you all for engaging and being wonderful and being here tonight. So this is called The Blueprint. Because the prophecy said, build this room hinged to sky, a doorway, a sill, a step, a floor, a chimney with nothing to burn. The ghosts have brick dust on their clothes, gunpowder bones. All night, the hammers christen wood, railings, spindles, joists, baseboards, cupboards in cupboards, frames, posts, hallways, the only way to life, this labyrinth. A window to a window, trapdoor, skylight, stairway, each small step eternally divided. The ghosts have sawdust in their hair, demolished wings, new sketches for forgiveness. Ballroom, bedroom, cupola, carriage house, walls around every emptiness.